The reception hall shimmered with warm amber light, the kind you'd expect in a magazine spread about perfect weddings. The air smelled faintly of fresh lilies and polished wood, and the clinking of champagne flutes punctuated the soft hum of jazz playing from a corner stage. I stood near the back, letting the crowd's conversations swirl around me. My daughter Alison looked radiant in her gown, the very picture of happiness. Her new husband beaming beside her. I should have been soaking in that joy, but instead I felt the weight of a dozen curious glances flicking toward me. I'd been invited, yes, but only because Alison insisted. My seat was tucked far from the head table, somewhere between a pair of distant relatives I hadn't seen in 20 years. It didn't bother me much. I wasn't there for attention. I was there because it was my daughter's day, and that mattered more than anything. Then the microphone squealed lightly, and Michael, my new son-in-law, stood raising his glass with a smirk that seemed just a shade too pleased with itself. His voice carried easily over the murmurs of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, drawing a pause for dramatic effect. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate with us. It's not every day you find your perfect match, and sometimes you meet their family too." The crowd chuckled politely. My eyes stayed on him, my jaw relaxed, my hands steady on the stem of my water glass. He went on, "You know, when I first met Alison's dad, I didn't know much about him. I figured maybe he was some kind of businessman or professor. But then I found out." He turned slightly toward me, and in that instant, I knew he was setting up for something. "He's actually a waiter." The room shifted, a ripple of awkward laughter, a few raised eyebrows. The punchline was meant to sting, and I felt the faintest prickle at the back of my neck. He wasn't finished. "But hey," he added, swirling the champagne in his glass, "at least he's got experience serving people, so he's perfect for tonight." Laughter followed, louder this time, though not everyone joined in. Some people looked at me, waiting to see my reaction. I simply smiled faintly and sipped my water. Inside I could feel the old instinct to speak up, to defend myself. Years ago, I might have. But I've learned that when someone tries to humiliate you in public, the smartest thing you can do is let them believe they've succeeded, at least for the moment. Revenge, if you choose it, works best in silence and on your own terms. The rest of the speech droned on, Michael dropping more little comments here and there, each one trying to paint me as the unambitious ordinary father in a room full of people with polished titles and expensive watches. I kept my face unreadable. By the time the applause came, he probably thought I'd been put in my place. But in my mind, I was already laying out the plan. Not a plan for an outburst or a confrontation that would only give him more of the spotlight. No, I'd let the world see who I really was, in a way that Michael wouldn't be able to spin or explain away. And when it happened, he'd remember this night, not as the day he married Alison, but as the day he picked the wrong man to underestimate. After Michael's little performance, I stayed in my seat for a while, pretending to focus on the plate of roasted salmon in front of me. I could feel the subtle shifts in the air, the glances, the whispered exchanges from a few tables over. Some people were enjoying the joke at my expense. Others looked uncomfortable, probably wondering why I didn't at least try to defend myself. The truth was, I'd learned a long time ago that public humiliation only lasts if you let it stick to you. A well-timed smile, a nod, and silence often leave the offender more uneasy than any sharp retort ever could. And Michael didn't realize it yet, but I wasn't the kind of man to carry a bruise without making sure it healed into a scar he'd see every day. When the dancing started, I took the opportunity to slip out to the patio. The air outside was cooler, carrying the faint scent of the nearby bay. A handful of guests stood out there, smoking cigars, talking about stocks and vacation homes. They barely acknowledged me, which suited me just fine. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the city lights winking across the water. From inside, I could hear Michael laughing, that same smug tone he'd used at the mic. I imagined him retelling the waiter joke to his groomsmen, soaking up their approval. Let him have his moment, I thought. He'd earned the applause of the shallow. What I had planned would earn silence, the kind that comes when people see something they can't joke away. I finished my drink and returned just in time for the cake cutting. Alison caught my eye, her smile warm but questioning, as if she sensed something was off. She didn't know what Michael had said outside her earshot earlier in the day, and I wasn't about to tell her. Not yet. Tonight was hers, and I wouldn't let his pettiness cloud it. Still, I couldn't help remembering the first time I'd met him. The handshake that didn't linger, the way he sized up my shoes before looking me in the eye, the subtle way he dropped his alma mater into every other sentence. He'd always been the type to measure worth in bank accounts and business cards. To him, my job title had been the end of the story. But that was because he didn't know the whole thing. What Michael didn't see, what most people didn't, was that I'd chosen my life the way a man chooses a path through the woods. I'd worked high-powered jobs in my younger days, the kind that come with corner offices and expense accounts. But I'd walked away when I realized the trade-off: long hours for strangers' profit, and no time for the moments that actually matter. Serving tables wasn't about money for me, it was about peace, control, and keeping my life on my own terms. And that's the part that made me smile as I left that night. Because Michael had assumed my silence came from shame. In reality, it came from knowing that the next time he saw me in a public setting, he wouldn't be laughing. He'd be blinking at the television screen, wondering how a waiter ended up there, and why the whole city seemed to know my name. The morning after the reception, the house felt like a stage after the curtain drops, confetti still clinging to the floorboards, the air gone flat. I brewed coffee and stood at the sink long enough for the mug to cool in my hand. Every replay of Michael's toast ended the same way, with me smiling back at him, while the laughter broke in little waves around the room. I set the mug down and pulled the plastic garment bag from the hall closet. Black pants, white shirt, slim black tie. The uniform I've worn so long that my body finds its shape inside it without looking. People think uniforms erase the man inside them. I've always thought the opposite. They let a man choose when to be seen. Tony Alvarez picked up on the second ring. He's owned Harbor and Vine for 22 years, the kind of owner who still shows up for the first delivery and the last mop. "You up early for a Sunday, Dave?" he said, voice rough with coffee and a lifetime of steam. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. "You still handling private events off-site, every weekend?" "Why?" I told him about the reception, not the cheap shots. Tony already knows the shape of pride when it gets its teeth into a man, but the part that mattered, my daughter's husband deciding where a father fits in his new order. He let out a low sound that wasn't quite anger. "What do you need?" "A shift," I said. "Not here. Wherever your crew's moving this week." There was a pause long enough for me to hear him thinking. "Wednesday night we've got Bayview Pavilion, big corporate glad-handing thing. Same crowd that drinks champagne at weddings and says partners like it's a confession. Client's name rings a bell. Michael Huntley." "That your guy?" "Yes, figures." Tony blew out a breath. "You sure about this, hermano? It's a hard pill, serving a man who thinks your worth fits on a check stub." "I won't be serving him," I said. "I'll be serving the room." That's the point. He didn't try to talk me out of it. Tony never has. Report at 3. Black on black, soft souls. Leave the ego at home. You can keep the heart. I still need you to be human. "Always," I said, and we hung up. I spent the afternoon doing small work that steadies a man, polishing shoes, stitching a loose button, ironing a crease so sharp it could hold a line. A text arrived from Allison just after 2. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Are you happy?" I was, and then I wasn't. "I'm sorry, Dad." "You owe me nothing," I wrote. "Just live the life you chose. I'll meet you there." I didn't tell her about Bayview. She deserved a week without war. By Wednesday the wind off the water had picked up, snapping the flags along the promenade and carrying the smell of salt into the loading bay behind Bayview Pavilion. Catering vans backed into their slots like practiced dancers. Inside the service corridor, the air throbbed with the orchestral clatter of a kitchen at tempo, sheet pans sliding, burners blooming, the barked shorthand of cooks who respect the clock. Tony handed me a laminated badge and a smile edged with worry. "You're on champagne and first course stations. Stay off the main aisle until the room settles." And Dave, Bayview keeps the lobby screens tuned to that retro film channel. Guests like to pretend they remember black and white. "Don't let the noise distract you." "I won't," I said. though the note snagged on something old in me. We rolled the glassware out like an army, hundreds of flutes catching the work lights and throwing them back in clean shards. I set up on the far side of the ballroom, away from the dais. Bayview does what expensive rooms do, hides its bones under velvet and brass. Round tables in cream and navy, centerpieces tall enough to block eye contact, a stage dressed in corporate adjectives, innovation, leadership, future, stenciled in white against a screen that would later glow with a slideshow of people who believed adjectives were character. At 6, the guests arrived. They always do the same slow orbit, check in at the easel, admire themselves in the glass, decide whose hand to shake first. I became motion, paw, tilt, napkin, nod, moving through clusters of strangers without making a ripple. You learn the microgeography of a room quickly, when your job is to keep it from noticing its own thirst. Michael entered with the board he wants to impress. He wore success like a tailored truth, shoulders set, chin a fraction high. Our eyes touched for half a second. He blinked first. He wasn't expecting a ghost in pressed black, carrying a tray that had more gravity than his grin. I didn't look again. At 6:40, the lobby TV over the bar shifted from a car commercial to a monochrome scene, a naval pier, gulls cutting white arcs, a young officer in dress blues, jaw set, eyes clear, arguing with a superior who had already forgotten what it felt like to believe in something stubborn. The channel badge in the corner read, Silver Screen Wednesdays. The bartender, a kid with a thoughtful face and forearms mapped by summer work, glanced up. "My granddad loves this one," he said. "Always says the kid reminds him of himself." "Your granddad had a better haircut," I told him, smiling. He laughed and didn't press. Sometimes kindness is letting a thing sit where it belongs. By 7, the room was running. First course landed with the soft choreography that makes 100 plates feel inevitable. I filled, I cleared, I kept the table edges dry with the back fold of a linen that never quite leaves your fingertips. At the dais, Michael tested the microphone with a knuckle and practiced his smile toward the dark glass of the sound booth. Then it happened the way these things do, by accident at first, then all at once. A woman in a pewter dress waiting for her husband at the bar, squinted at the television, leaning forward as if the screen could meet her halfway. "That face," she said to no one and everyone. "Where do I know that face?" The bartender glanced up again, then down into the room, then up. "No way," he murmured. 2 men near the registry table turned, followed his line of sight, and performed the same double-take screen, floor, screen, me. The hum of the ballroom didn't break, it shifted key. Nothing chills a room faster than an unexpected comparison. On the screen, the young officer took a punch and stayed upright, blood at the corner of his mouth, dignity unbroken. In the ballroom, I lifted a bottle and refilled 4 glasses, each pour identical, each smile modest enough to pass through unnoticed. You don't run when the past taps your shoulder, you decide whether to turn. The first "excuse me" came from a woman with silver hair and a posture that used to be a lesson. "I'm sorry," she said, kind enough to make space around the question, "but were you ever in another life?" I answered gently. "Tonight I'm here." I tipped the bottle. She let it go. Word spreads in rooms like Bayview as efficiently as a rumor in a small town. A table near the back pulled out phones, thumbs moving, whispers lifting like steam. A man in a tux with hands too soft to know where the wrench fits murmured to his wife. She looked at the TV, then at me, then at Michael. Michael tightened. You could see it in the throat, the way a swallow hurts when pride has to pass through. He lifted his glass and tapped it with a spoon. "Friends," he began, assured as a salesman with a quota, "thank you for joining us to celebrate partnerships that build this city." The screen cut to a close-up, 24-year-old me, telling a woman on a bench that you don't measure a life by trophies you can drop. The bartender froze, then God bless the young, reached up and nudged the volume a step higher. "I'll be brief," Michael said, "only louder now, because I know the real reason you came is to talk to each other." A woman 3 tables from the stage stood, one hand over her mouth, the other rising in a small involuntary salute toward the television. "I saw this in a theater with my sister," she whispered, the words finding me through a corridor of candles and crystal. We cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I met her eyes and nodded once, because sometimes gratitude doesn't need verbs. Michael's laugh thinned. "Anyway," he said, "we're proud to. Is that him?" A young voice blurted near the doors. "Is that him?" I set the bottle down, untied the waist loop of my apron, and folded it with the same neat precision I give a bill at the end of a long night. Then I rested both hands on the edge of my station, and let the room come to me. I didn't climb a step, didn't clear my throat, didn't act. I only stood where the air could find my face and breathed like a man who has finally decided not to apologize for being himself. The applause didn't start with a bang. It started with the fragile clink of one pair of hands, then another, then a third, small, honest sounds that grew sturdy by the time they reached the back wall. The bartender stared like he was watching his grandfather walk through his own story. The woman in pewter dabbed at her eye with a napkin she had paid too much for. Michael tried to clap, too, because men like him are fluent in optics. But the room wasn't looking at him. It had found a different gravity. I inclined my head to the crowd, no flourish, no bow, and picked up my apron again. Work is its own kind of prayer. I tied the knot once, tight. Across the room, a tall man, with silver hair, and a producer's posture slipped in and waved, 2 fingers low at his hip as if we'd used the signal for years. I hadn't seen him in decades. Only one person would show up without a text, and look exactly the age he refused to be. Frank Mercer, the first director who told me the camera doesn't love beauty, it loves truth. He didn't call out. He mouthed a sentence that made the floor tilt under my shoes. "You still got it, kid." I smiled, couldn't help it, and turned another glass to catch the pour just right. Somewhere behind me, Michael swallowed the kind of silence money can't buy back. Somewhere ahead, the night lifted its curtain for a second act he hadn't planned. The thing about revenge, no one tells you, is that it doesn't always thunder. Sometimes, it walks in wearing a server's vest, sets down a tray with steady hands, and lets the room make up its own mind. And when it chooses quickly. The days after the wedding were quieter than I expected. Normally, after such an event, there's a swirl of gossip that reaches you, through mutual friends, through whispers at the restaurant, through the occasional text that pretends to be casual, but is actually fishing for details. But this time, nothing. It was as if everyone had collectively decided to file me away as an afterthought. Part of me wondered if Michael had done that on purpose. People like him, with carefully crafted images, knew how to make problems disappear, whether it was a business deal gone sour, or a father-in-law who didn't fit the polished picture. I imagined him spinning the story to guests. "He's just a waiter. You know how some people are, living in the past, can't move on." It wouldn't surprise me. I went back to my shifts at the restaurant, moving through the familiar rhythm of taking orders, carrying plates, topping off glasses. Some customers smiled in recognition, others barely noticed me. I could feel the lingering sting of Michael's words, as if every time someone glanced at my black apron and white shirt, they were silently confirming his judgment. Then, on the 3rd evening after the wedding, as I was polishing cutlery in the back, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unfamiliar number, area code from Los Angeles. I almost ignored it. Spam calls are a hazard of modern life, but something in me, maybe the faintest echo of the man I used to be, said to answer. "Hello?" I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder while I wiped a fork. "Is this Daniel Hartman?" The voice was rich, deep, and oddly familiar. "This is him," I replied cautiously. "It's Frank Mitchell." The name hit me like a stage light flipping on. Frank had been a casting director back in my acting days, one of the rare ones who didn't treat auditions like cattle calls. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. "Frank?" Wow, it's been a long time." "Too long," he agreed. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Listen, I'll cut to the chase. I was at that wedding last weekend. You didn't see me, but I saw what happened, and I also saw how you handled yourself." My stomach tightened. "You were there?" "Front row," he said. "And I'll tell you what, Michael might think you're just a waiter, but the way you kept your composure, that's stage presence, the kind you can't fake." I laughed under my breath, not sure if that's a compliment or just a polite way of saying I didn't cause a scene. "It's a compliment," Frank said firmly. I'm working on a new project, a limited series for a major network. We need a man with gravitas, someone who can command a room without raising his voice. You came to mind immediately. I leaned against the counter, fork forgotten in my hand. Frank, I haven't acted in years. I'm not sure I am, he interrupted. Look, the audition's in 2 days. I'll send you the script. You read, you show up, you do your thing. The rest is my job. For a moment I didn't say anything. The restaurant noise hummed around me, the clink of plates, the low murmur of conversation, the faint hiss from the kitchen. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me I'd buried began to stir. All right, I said finally. Send me the details. That's the Daniel I remember, Frank said, and I could almost hear the smile in his voice. This could be big for you. Don't waste it. When I hung up, I stood there for a while, phone still in my hand. The world hadn't changed in those few minutes. The table still needed clearing, the cutlery still needed polishing, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt the pull of the stage lights, the promise of an audience. Michael's words at the wedding had tried to shrink me, to fit me into a small safe box labeled irrelevant. But Frank's call had cracked that box wide open. And I knew deep down that if I played this right, the next time Michael saw me, it wouldn't be across a dinner table. It would be from his living room, staring at the television, with the rest of the country watching right alongside him. I woke before the alarm, the kind of early that belongs to bakers and men with something heavy on their minds. The apartment was still, holding its breath with me. I made coffee in the old stovetop pot, because waiting for a drip machine felt like cowardice. Steam rose, bitter and honest. While it hissed, I pulled the garment bag from the back of the closet and laid it across the bed like an old flag. The suit was midnight blue, the fabric still holding the faint cedar smell of the box I'd kept it in. I ran my palm down the lapel and felt an old reflex wake up, posture straightening, jaw setting, shoulders finding their line. It was absurd in a way, how clothes could summon a man you thought you'd retired. But muscle remembers what pride tries to forget. Frank's email arrived at 7:12 a.m. Sides attached, character notes brief but sharp. Thomas Avery, 62, former union organizer. A man who learned to speak softly because he once shouted and lost people he loved. I printed the pages, then read them twice standing at the counter, once sitting at the table, and again leaning against the window where the morning light turned the words into small boats crossing bright water. The first scene was an interrogation that wasn't labeled one, a young journalist trying to bait an old lion. The second was smaller, an apology given without self-pity. The third was the kind of monologue you don't play. You let it happen to your face and hope the camera knows how to listen. I showered, shaved, and cut the stray hairs that sneak out when a man stops paying attention. In the mirror, a stranger looked back, older than the man the billboards once liked, but steadier. I practiced the first line under my breath. Then I practiced the silence after it, which mattered more. At mid-morning, I walked to the park with the pages in a manila folder, the city moving around me like a patient animal. A sax player under the overpass warmed up on scales that made the underside of the bridge sound like a chapel. I found an empty bench and began to work. Not on the words, those were obedient enough, but on the weight beneath them. Why Avery pauses, where his eyes go when he doesn't want to lie, but can't afford to tell the truth. The way a hand finds the table when a memory tries to sit him down. A jogger slowed near the bench to stretch. Community theater, he asked. Friendly, curious. Something like that, I said, and he grinned, wiped his face with his sleeve, and kept moving. Sometimes dignity lives in not explaining yourself to strangers. Around noon I called Allison. How's married life? I asked, aiming for lightness that didn't quite make it. Quieter than the wedding, she said, and we both laughed. Are you okay, Dad? I'm focused, I answered. I've got an audition. The pause was surprise first, then joy. You're kidding. For what? A series. Character work. I didn't give details. The less you promise, the more room you leave for the truth to grow. I always knew you weren't done, she said softly. Break a leg. I'll take luck, I said. But I'll settle for truth. After we hung up, I walked to Harbour and Vine even though I wasn't on the schedule. Miguel was at the bar doing inventory, counting bottles with a pencil he never bothered to sharpen. "You look like a man with a plane to catch," he said. "Just a room to enter," I answered. "Mind if I use the private dining room for an hour?" He glanced at the folder in my hand and nodded toward the back. "Take the corner table. Lights are best there. I'll kill the music." The private room was empty and quiet, linen draped and faintly lemon from the morning polish. I set my phone on a water glass and used it as a makeshift camera, framing myself against the far wall. For a while I ran the scene into the lens, then turned the screen toward me and watched. Old habits rose like tide lines, an eyebrow that liked to do too much, a hand prone to speech if I didn't give it work. I sanded them down. I simplified. I took the ornament off the tree and left the shape. Miguel appeared in the doorway once, watched without interrupting, and left. When I finished a clean pass that felt like Avery instead of me pretending, he returned with a plate, grilled chicken, rice, green beans with butter and salt enough to feel like a decision.
"Eat," he said. "Actors forget."
"I'm not an..." I started, then stopped. "Thank you." By late afternoon, the light had slipped toward amber. I went home and tried on the suit. The jacket settled over my shoulders, like it recognized the address. The shoes were tight until I walked a short runway from kitchen to window and back 3 times, then they forgave me. I practiced the small things, how to enter, how to set the pages down, without apologizing to them, how to greet a room that can smell fear. I ironed a white shirt twice, just to hear the steam. I chose a tie, then removed it. Avery wouldn't wear a tie to this. Men who've outlived their reputations know what they no longer need. At 6, Frank called. "How's the old machine running?" he asked. "Needs oil," I said, "but the gears still catch." "You don't need oil," he replied. "You need air, breathe, and listen more than you talk. They'll lean in if you make them do the work." "I remember," I said, and we let the quiet sit for a beat. He cleared his throat. "One more thing, the showrunner's a straight shooter. If she says thank you, it means nothing. If she says see you soon, don't smile until you're outside." "I'll keep my face in my pocket," I told him. And he laughed. After we hung up, I printed a fresh set of sides and slipped them into a folder that didn't have coffee stains. I laid out everything on the chair by the door the way I used to when Allison was small, and mornings were a series of forgotten socks. Keys, wallet, pages, 2 pens, one that writes and one that looks like a man who prepares. I tried to sleep and failed, then gave up and walked the living room in slow loops, reciting the monologue in a whisper until the words lost their magic and became simple stones in my mouth. That was good. Stones don't float away when nerves blow through. Stones stay where you set them. Near midnight, I poured an inch of bourbon and toasted the empty room. "To the work," I said, because that's all I ever trusted. Not applause, not reviews, not the heat of a moment that cools when a newer face walks in. Just the work, the thing you can do in an empty room when no one is grading you but the man you have to be tomorrow. I slept a few hours. Woke before the sun again. The city made its first noises. Garbage truck, distant siren, someone dragging a reluctant dog down the sidewalk. I showered, dressed, and stood in front of the mirror one last time. The man looking back didn't ask for permission. He was simple, exact, prepared. On my way out, I paused with my hand on the knob, as if the door were a hinge on 2 lives. Maybe it was. I thought of Michael's smile at the microphone, the room's thin laughter, the way humiliation tries to grow roots, if you water it. Then I thought of the bartender's face at Bayview, the applause that didn't need me to bow, Frank's voice telling me the camera still likes truth. I locked the door behind me and stepped into a morning that felt like a stage with no audience yet. The air had that clean edge it gets when the world is willing to begin again. I walked toward it, pages under my arm, breath steady. Whatever waited on the other side of that casting room door, I would meet it standing up. And if the room leaned in, it wouldn't be because I shouted. It would be because, after a very long intermission, I remembered how to speak softly and be heard. The studio building stood on the corner of a street that smelled faintly of roasted coffee and wet concrete. Glass doors caught the morning sun, flashing it back at me like a challenge. Inside, the lobby was all clean lines and quiet hum, marble floors, brushed steel railings, and the low murmur of people trying to look calm while their stomachs worked overtime. A young receptionist with a headset and a smile that had seen too many anxious faces greeted me. "Good morning. Audition for the Long Harbor?" she asked. "That's the one," I said, handing her my ID. My name printed neatly on the sign-in sheet looked like it belonged to someone else. She pointed toward a seating area lined with chairs that weren't designed for comfort. A few hopefuls sat there, scripts in their laps, some whispering lines, others staring at nothing, as if willing the part to walk over and shake their hand. Most of them were younger, late 30s, maybe early 40s, lean, sharp-eyed, with the kind of haircuts that suggested agents and stylists in their corner. I caught one or two glances when I sat down, the polite but curious look of people wondering if I was lost or filling in for someone's grandfather. I opened my folder and skimmed the sides again, not because I didn't know them, but because the act of looking at paper steadied my hands. The monologue lived in my bones now. Still, I let my eyes trace each word like an old ritual. From the hallway came the muffled voice of a man reading lines, followed by polite laughter. A casting assistant stepped out a moment later, clipboard in hand. "Robert Mason," she called. A tall man in a blazer got up, smoothed his hair, and disappeared inside. The door shut with a click that echoed louder than it should have. 10 minutes later, it was my turn. "Daniel Hayes." I stood, feeling the weight of my suit jacket settle over my shoulders like armor. The room beyond the door was bright, too bright at first. Fluorescent panels hummed overhead, bouncing light off white walls. A long table sat at the far end, behind which 3 people studied me with the kind of focus usually reserved for courtroom testimonies. In the middle sat a woman with cropped silver hair and the kind of stillness that spoke of authority. This had to be the showrunner Frank mentioned. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I replied, voice steady. I set my folder on the chair provided, resisting the urge to shuffle my pages. "We'll start with scene 2, she said. "When you're ready." The assistant marked the start on a small camera to the side. I took a slow breath, found Avery's posture, and began. The words left me not as recitation, but as thought, hesitating in the right places, hitting the table gently on the line about lost friends, letting my eyes drift just past them, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. I didn't think about the camera, or the clock, or the silence after my last word. I just stood there, letting Avery breathe. When I finished, there was a pause, not the uncomfortable kind, but the one where people are still in the moment you've built. The showrunner finally leaned back. "Thank you," she said, and nodded slightly to her right. A man in glasses asked, "Could you try it again? This time, make the apology feel like it costs him more. Less regret, more resignation." I nodded, adjusted my stance, and did it again, letting the weight settle lower in my chest, letting the words land as if they hurt but were unavoidable. When I stopped, no one spoke for a beat. Then the showrunner's mouth curved slightly. "We'll be in touch," she said. "Not thank you. Not that's all. We'll be in touch." I remembered Frank's advice and kept my face still, just a polite nod before I collected my folder. As I stepped back into the hallway, the air felt cooler. The next actor waiting looked up, gave me a quick half smile, then went back to his script. I walked past the receptionist, out the glass doors, and into sunlight that seemed sharper than before. I didn't know yet if I'd booked it. But something in me, the part that had been boxed up and stored away, had already stepped back into the light. 3 days passed, each one stretched thin with waiting. I went about my usual routine: morning coffee, a walk through the park, dinner alone at the kitchen table, but every sound from my phone sent a ripple of adrenaline through me. By the 3rd morning, I'd almost convinced myself the audition was a good memory to hold on to, nothing more. It was late afternoon when the call came. I was rinsing a coffee mug when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I hesitated, half expecting it to be a robocall, then swiped to answer. Mr. Hayes? The voice was brisk, professional. This is Lauren Blake, casting director for the Long Harbor. Do you have a moment? My grip tightened on the mug. Yes, I do. We'd like to offer you the role of Avery. For a moment the words didn't land. It was as though she'd spoken in another language. I got the part? You did, she confirmed, a smile audible in her voice. The showrunner was very impressed with your interpretation. Filming starts in 4 weeks. You'll receive the contract and schedule by email. I thanked her, managing to keep my voice calm, though my heart was trying to outpace a racehorse. When the call ended, I set the mug down and just stood there, letting the reality sink in. The kitchen around me looked the same scuffed countertop, same hum of the refrigerator, but I felt like I was standing in a different life. For the first time in years, I wasn't just Daniel Hayes, the man who used to be someone. I was Daniel Hayes, cast as a lead in a major television drama. I called Frank first. He answered on the second ring. You sound like a man with news, he said. I got it, I told him. He let out a bark of laughter. I knew it. Didn't I tell you? Congratulations, my friend. You're about to remind everyone exactly who you are. We talked for another few minutes before he insisted on celebrating that weekend. When I hung up, I scrolled to my son's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I stopped. Not yet. I wanted to tell him, wanted to hear the pause on the other end when he realized what this meant. But I also remembered his last words to me at the wedding, spoken just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. He's just a waiter. No, I decided. He would hear about this another way. Not from me, not in a casual phone call. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the email from the production office. The contract was thick with legal language, but one clause caught my eye. The studio had first rights to announce the casting, which meant it would be in the trades, the entertainment blogs, the local news, everywhere. I pictured my son's face when someone forwarded him the link. I imagined the expressions of his in-laws, the ones who'd smirked at me over champagne flutes, as if I were an embarrassment to be endured. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake, but I wasn't above letting the truth do its own work. Filming was still weeks away, but my mind was already there, standing on set, camera rolling, delivering Avery's lines with the weight they deserved. And somewhere out in the world, the people who dismissed me would be watching, unable to look away. The official press release went out on a Tuesday morning. I didn't know the exact time, only that my phone began vibrating on the nightstand just after 6. At first I thought it might be Frank with an early congratulations, but when I swiped the screen awake, I saw a flood of notifications from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Old colleagues, theater friends, even an old college roommate. They all seemed to have read the same headline. Veteran actor Daniel Hayes returns to screen, in lead role for The Long Harbor. One of the first messages was from a woman named Carol, who had been the head costumer on a production I did nearly 20 years ago. Saw the announcement, Danny. Knew you still had it in you. Don't let them forget it. I scrolled through dozens more, each one a small spark of validation. But what I was really waiting for wasn't a message to me. It was the inevitable ripple this news would cause. By mid-morning, the entertainment blogs had picked it up, running side-by-side images of me in a tuxedo from my old film days. Next to the new headshot the studio had released. My hair was silver now, my face more lined, but the comments were surprisingly kind. Words like distinguished, seasoned, commanding presence kept appearing beneath the articles. Frank called, his voice practically buzzing. It's everywhere, Dan. My neighbor just knocked on my door to show me the article, like it was breaking news. I laughed, but there was an edge of satisfaction in it. Guess I'm not just a waiter anymore. It wasn't until the afternoon that I got my first indirect sign from my son's side of the family. A mutual acquaintance tagged me in a post on social media, a link to the article with the caption, "From serving tables to serving the screen." What a comeback. Within minutes, I noticed likes and comments from people I recognized from the wedding reception. People who had once avoided conversation with me were now chiming in with public praise, as if they'd always believed in me. I didn't reply. Not yet. That evening, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The air was cool, and the sunset painted long shadows across the pavement. As I passed the cafe on the corner, the young barista who usually handed me my coffee with polite disinterest looked up from her phone and grinned. "Hey, you're that actor, right? My mom just sent me your article." I smiled back. Something like that. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and let the quiet wrap around me. This was only the beginning. Filming would start soon, and then the billboards, the trailers, the interviews would follow. My son and his in-laws would see my face in more places than they could avoid. The wedding had been their stage. This was mine. The first day on set felt like stepping into a memory and a dream at the same time. The studio lot smelled faintly of fresh paint and hot asphalt, the way it always did in the summer. Crew members moved with purpose, checking lighting rigs, wheeling cameras into position, and calling out directions over the hum of generators. The director, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura Monroe, greeted me with a handshake and a smile that said she'd already decided I belonged here. "Dan, glad you could join us. We've all been looking forward to seeing you work." Her confidence in me wasn't an act. I could hear it in her tone. For the first time in years, I wasn't a shadow at the edge of a room. I was the center of it. They walked me through the first scene, an emotionally charged moment between my character and his estranged son. As the cameras rolled, I could feel the years of performing flow back into my body, every gesture and pause as natural as breathing. When Laura called cut, there was a quiet moment on set before the crew broke into applause. It was the kind of reaction I hadn't dared hope for, but it told me everything. I was back, and I wasn't just passable, I was exceptional. During lunch, I noticed one of the younger actors scrolling through his phone with wide eyes. "Hey Dan, you're trending," he said, turning the screen toward me. There it was, my name on social media's top searches, accompanied by clips of the scene we'd just filmed. Someone from the crew had leaked a snippet, and the comments were already pouring in. Where has he been hiding all these years? Finally, a real actor with gravitas. This guy's making everyone else on screen look like amateurs. The irony wasn't lost on me. A few months earlier, I was just the waiter in the eyes of my son-in-law and his snide friends. Now, I was being called a master of my craft by strangers around the world. By the end of the week, the production sent out official stills from the set. One of them, me in a weathered coat, looking directly into the camera with quiet intensity, made its way onto the homepage of a major entertainment site. That's when the first text came in from my son. It was short, almost hesitant. "Saw the article. Looks like you're doing well." I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to reply. In the end, I typed only 2 words: better than ever. No anger, no gloating, just the truth. Because I knew what was coming. The premiere wasn't far off, and when the lights dimmed and the credits rolled, there would be no mistaking who had truly commanded the room. This was no longer just a comeback. It was the beginning of a reckoning. 2 weeks later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived at my door. The weight of it alone hinted at importance, and when I opened it, the embossed lettering confirmed it. It was a personal invitation to the movie's red carpet premiere. I knew they sent these to all key cast members, but I also knew something else. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The guest list for this event would be a who's who of the city: press, celebrities, critics, and more importantly, anyone who wanted to be seen in the right social circles. It didn't take long for word of the premiere to reach my son and his wife. I heard about it indirectly, through a mutual friend who told me they were talking about how amazing it would be to attend. But tickets were limited, and they certainly wouldn't be getting one through me. Still, the universe has a way of making things interesting. A week before the event, I received a call from Laura, the director. "Dan," she said, with a hint of amusement, "your family reached out to the studio for tickets. You okay if I put them on the reserved list?" I paused, leaning back in my chair. I could have said no without hesitation. But then I realized, why should I? If they wanted to be there, let them see everything with their own eyes. "Sure," I replied smoothly. "Make sure they're seated somewhere they'll have a clear view." The day of the premiere was one of those perfect early fall evenings where the air feels just crisp enough to make you appreciate the warmth of a tailored suit. I arrived in a black tuxedo, my shoes polished to a mirror shine. The flashes of cameras lit up the night as I stepped onto the carpet, publicists calling my name, reporters leaning forward with recorders extended. I could feel eyes on me, not just from the crowd, but from across the street where, behind the velvet ropes, my son and his wife were watching the arrivals. They weren't on the carpet, they had the kind of tickets that got them inside, but not the spotlight. Still, I caught the flicker of disbelief on their faces as photographers shouted my name again and again. Inside, the theater buzzed with anticipation. My reserved row was near the center, prime seating for the best viewing experience. And just as planned, a few rows back sat my son and his in-laws. The lights dimmed, and the screen came alive. From the very first scene, the room was silent, except for the sound of the film and the occasional rustle of popcorn. And then came my first appearance. Larger than life, voice steady and commanding, every movement purposeful. I didn't need to turn around to know they were watching me differently now. Every line I delivered, every reaction shot, was a quiet reminder of how wrong they'd been. By the time the credits rolled, there was a standing ovation. Not for the whole cast, at least not equally. I could feel the applause sharpen when my name appeared on the screen. When the lights came up, I finally turned around. My son's face was pale, his wife's lips pressed into a tight line. They didn't approach me, not yet, but the message had been delivered. Loud and clear. This wasn't just a film premiere. It was my declaration. I was never just a waiter, and I never would be. The crowd poured out of the theater into the glittering lobby, a sea of black suits, shimmering gowns, and excited voices bouncing off the marble walls. The energy was electric. Everyone was talking about the movie, and I caught more than a few people whispering my name as they passed. I was shaking hands with one of the producers when I saw them, my son Matthew and his wife Claire, standing awkwardly near the far corner. They looked like they were deciding whether to approach or retreat. Their in-laws were with them, whispering in hushed tones, but the moment Matthew's eyes met mine, I knew the decision had been made. He started walking toward me, Claire trailing half a step behind. His confident stride from the wedding day was gone. Now every step looked heavy, almost hesitant. "Dad," he said when he reached me, his voice tight. "We didn't know you were." He gestured vaguely toward the posters on the walls with my face on them. All this, I studied him for a moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. "No," I said evenly. "You didn't." Claire forced a thin smile. "You were amazing tonight. Really, amazing." Her tone was polished, but her eyes betrayed her, a mix of embarrassment and the dawning realization that they had gravely underestimated me. "I appreciate that," I said, keeping my voice calm, almost casual. "It's been a long road to get here." Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, about the wedding." I raised a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "We don't need to revisit that. I remember exactly what was said." My gaze sharpened, and I took a small step closer. "And I remember exactly how you looked at me that night." His jaw tightened. I was out of line. "Yes," I said plainly. "You were. And now you know that respect isn't something you can measure by the uniform someone wears or the job title they hold." There was a flicker of something shame, maybe regret in his eyes. Claire looked down at the floor, her manicured fingers twisting around her clutch. Around us the flow of guests continued, the hum of conversation, creating a strange bubble of privacy in the middle of the chaos. I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. "You know," I said, "the director told me you asked for tickets to this premiere. I made sure you got them. I let that hang in the air for a beat. I wanted you to see for yourself exactly who I am, and exactly what you tried to diminish." Matthew swallowed hard, but he didn't argue. Claire finally murmured, "We misjudged you." I allowed myself a small smile, not of forgiveness, but of quiet victory. "Yes, you did." I turned back to the producer, leaving them standing there in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by the buzz of success that had nothing to do with them. For once they weren't the center of attention, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need their approval. 2 weeks after the premiere, the invitations went out for the Governor's Arts and Culture Gala, a black-tie event attended by state leaders, philanthropists, and the most influential names in the entertainment industry. I had been selected as one of the evening's honorees, an acknowledgement not just of my latest role, but of my decades of contribution to theatre and film. I knew Matthew and Claire would be there. Her father served on the event's board, and for years they had flaunted their seats at the head table as a marker of status. This year, however, things would be different. The organizers had quietly informed me that the head table would be reserved for honorees and their guests. When I arrived, the red carpet stretched ahead, lined with flashing cameras. The air was crisp, the kind of cool evening that made the city lights feel sharper. I stepped out of the black town car in my tailored tuxedo, the governor himself standing at the entrance to greet me. "Robert Hayes," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "It's an honor to have you here tonight." "Thank you, Governor," I replied, my voice steady but carrying that undercurrent of satisfaction that comes from knowing the tables have turned. Inside the grand ballroom, I saw them. Matthew and Claire were already seated at a smaller table toward the middle of the room, far from the stage. They looked over just as the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome to the head table our distinguished honoree Robert Hayes." Every head turned. The applause rolled across the room like a wave. I could see Matthew's posture stiffen, Claire's polite smile falter. The very people they had tried to impress at the wedding were now watching me walk past them, shaking hands with senators, actors and CEOs. The evening unfolded like a carefully scripted play. Speeches were given, awards presented, and when my name was called for the Lifetime Achievement Award, I stepped onto the stage under a wash of golden light. I spoke about perseverance, about never allowing someone else's narrow vision to define your worth. I didn't name names, but my words carried weight, and I knew exactly who in that room felt the sting. "Success," I said, letting my gaze sweep over the audience, "isn't about the label someone slaps on you. It's about the truth you carry and the work you put in when no one is watching." The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. I held the award high, my eyes meeting Matthew's for the briefest moment. There was no anger in my expression, just the calm, unshakable look of a man who had already won. After the gala, as guests filtered out, Matthew approached me. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Dad, I'm proud of you." I smiled faintly. "I know you are. The difference is, I've always been proud of who I am, whether you saw it or not." I walked away into the night, the cool air carrying with it a sense of closure. They had tried to make me invisible. Instead, I'd made myself unforgettable.